They say true talent knows no age. But for one little girl, her gift wasn't a blessing, it was a burden. Until one day, in front of the whole world, she proved everyone wrong. They called her a genius, but to Sarah, being different felt more like a curse. At just 8 years old, she solved problems even her teachers couldn't. Yet the world laughed instead of listened. In front of her classmates, a professor, and a crowd of doubters, she did the impossible. She proved that brilliance has no age and courage has no limit. This is the story of the little girl who beat a genius and reminded everyone that believing in yourself is the greatest equation of all. But before we continue further, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Subscribe for more videos and turn on the bell notification so you won't miss an upcoming stories. Also feel free to tell us how you feel in the comments. Morning light filtered through the tall classroom windows, the kind of golden warmth that makes even dust look like glitter. It was one of those ordinary school mornings that children forget by afternoon, but not Sarah. For her, every day in this classroom was a quiet battle between wonder and belonging. She sat near the window, small legs barely reaching the floor, a pencil poised like a tiny sword. Around her, laughter bounced from desk to desk. The other kids compared lunchboxes, whispered secrets, folded paper airplanes. But Sarah's attention was fixed on the blackboard where long numbers waited like unsolved riddles. Mrs. Johnson's chalk squeaked softly as she wrote a new problem across the board. If 4 times something plus 8 equals 26, she said, turning back to the class. What is the number? A low hum filled the room. Groans, guesses, giggles. Fingers tapped on desks. A few students reached for calculators they weren't supposed to have. Sarah didn't move. She simply blinked, her mind tracing invisible lines through space. Numbers to her weren't just symbols. They were colors and patterns swirling together until one shape stood perfectly clear. 46. The answer formed in her head before Mrs. Johnson had finished turning around. She hesitated, eyes darting to Amber, the girl 2 rows ahead, the class favorite, the one everyone called a genius. Amber already had her hand in the air, confidence gleaming like polish on a trophy. Sarah's heart fluttered. She could speak. She could answer, but something inside whispered, wait. Mrs. Johnson called on Amber. Yes, dear? Amber's voice rang with practiced certainty. It's 5. A few kids nodded. Others shrugged. Mrs. Johnson smiled kindly. Close, but not quite. A tiny spark lit behind Sarah's eyes. She raised her hand slowly, timidly, as if unsure it was allowed to rise so high. The teacher noticed and brightened. Sarah? The room quieted. Sarah's voice came out small but steady. It's 4.5. Mrs. Johnson's eyebrows lifted. She worked the math on the board. 4.5 times 4 equals 18, plus 8 makes 26. Perfect. She turned, astonished, and said softly, That's right. A rustle moved through the classroom. Surprise, disbelief, a few rolling eyes. Sarah's cheeks warmed. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just loved the way numbers fit together. How every question had a hidden door if you looked long enough. The teacher wrote, Excellent work, Sarah beneath the equation, her handwriting looping elegantly. For a moment, the room felt lighter. Even the dust and the sunlight seemed to pause, admiring. But the stillness didn't last. Amber shifted in her seat, lips pressed tight. The pride she'd worn like a crown slipped slightly, and the children noticed. Whispers started in tiny waves. She's only 8. She's a baby. Teacher's pet. Sarah pretended not to hear. But sound has a way of finding the tender parts of heart. She lowered her eyes, tracing invisible numbers on her desk, each line a silent shield. Mrs. Johnson continued the lesson, unaware of the small storm gathering among her students. She spoke of variables and balance, about how every problem has a solution if you're patient enough. Sarah listened, but part of her drifted beyond the chalkboard. In her mind, numbers became stories. For it wasn't just 4, it was the number of steps she took from her seat to the window each recess. 8 was how many minutes it took her dad to walk her home after work when he wasn't too tired. 26 was the number of nights she'd fallen asleep to the rhythm of his calculator clicking at the kitchen table as he paid bills. For Sarah, mathematics wasn't about answers. It was about meaning. Every digit carried a memory, every equation a heartbeat. Still, in this room full of voices louder than hers, meaning didn't count for much. When the bell rang for recess, chairs scraped and laughter spilled into the hallway. Sarah stayed behind a moment, gathering her notebook. It was filled not with doodles, but with pages of strange, looping calculations that looked like artwork. She ran her fingers across the pencil marks, as if they were constellations she alone could read. Amber paused by her desk, surrounded by friends. Her voice was sugar-sweet, but sharp at the edges. Guess even little kids can get lucky sometimes. The girls giggled. Sarah looked up with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mrs. Johnson clapped her hands gently. All right, everyone, outside. The room emptied. Sarah packed her things and stood by the window instead of joining them. Outside, laughter echoed across the playground. The swings creaked. The sunlight danced on the slides. But Sarah's world was quiet, still filled with floating numbers that shimmered like bubbles before fading away. She thought about the problem again, about how something so simple could make others so uneasy. Was being right supposed to feel this lonely? The teacher approached softly. You did very well today, Sarah. Sarah nodded, her small hands tightening around her pencil. Compliments were nice, but they didn't fill the silence that came after. When the next lesson began, she took her seat once more, determined to stay invisible. But talent has a way of shining through, no matter how deeply it's tucked away. As the afternoon wore on, the classroom seemed to hum with quiet energy. Mrs. Johnson, inspired by the morning surprise, decided to push her students a little further. She drew a new problem, something complex, something even older students found tricky. Let's see how far we can go today, she said warmly. Sarah watched, eyes wide with excitement. She loved moments like this. Uncharted territory, mystery behind symbols. Around her, a collective groan rose again. But this time, Sarah felt an ember of courage flicker. While the others scribbled guesses, she imagined the numbers as puzzle pieces falling gently into place. A rhythm built inside her chest, slow and steady, like a heartbeat syncing with the tick of the classroom clock. When the answer revealed itself in her mind, it wasn't triumph she felt. It was peace. Mrs. Johnson called for volunteers. Silence. No hands lifted. Sarah waited a heartbeat, then another. Her fingers twitched. Finally, she raised her hand again. The teacher smiled. Go ahead, Sarah. She answered softly, barely louder than the whisper of chalk on slate. The solution was flawless. Mrs. Johnson's smile widened. Excellent. You're absolutely right. For an instant, pride flickered across Sarah's face, small, innocent, pure. She wasn't showing off. She was sharing joy. But the murmurs began again. Teacher's favorite. She must have cheated. Maybe her dad told her. Each word chipped at the fragile glow she carried inside. Her smile trembled, holding on, refusing to break. Amber turned around, eyes narrowing. It's easy when you memorize answers, she said under her breath, just loud enough for others to hear. A few kids snickered. One boy made exaggerated thinking faces, pretending to be super smart. Laughter rippled through the room, shallow and sharp. Mrs. Johnson turned back to write another equation, unaware of what those small laughs could do to a heart still learning what it means to belong. Sarah stared at her notebook, the lines blurring as her vision shimmered. She pressed her pencil to the paper and wrote the answer again, over and over, as if repetition could drown out the noise. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Inside, the sound of pencils scratching on paper felt heavier, slower. That was how she learned that sometimes being different doesn't make people curious. It makes them afraid. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply folded her hands atop her notebook and waited for the next question. And when Mrs. Johnson asked it, Sarah didn't raise her hand. Not because she didn't know the answer. She did. But because, for the first time, she wished she didn't. The teacher's voice faded into background hum. Sarah's mind drifted elsewhere, to her father, to the sound of coins clinking in a jar on their kitchen counter, to the promise he'd made that they'd get ice cream after his next paycheck. She thought about how, in math, things always balance eventually. You could always find a missing piece, fix what was broken. But life didn't seem to follow those rules. Her pencil rolled off the desk, clattering to the floor. A few students laughed. She bent to pick it up, cheeks burning, and caught Amber's smirk from across the aisle. Sarah exhaled, slow and shaky, returning to her seat. The laughter subsided, but its echo lingered. Mrs. Johnson asked another question. No one answered this time. Even Amber hesitated. And for a brief, delicate moment, Sarah wondered what it would feel like to belong, to be the one who didn't always know. That afternoon, the lesson ended early. Mrs. Johnson stepped out to talk to another teacher, leaving the class to finish worksheets. The chatter resumed instantly. Paper rustled, pencils tapped. Sarah worked quietly, solving problems faster than she could write them down. Numbers danced like old friends around her. But amid their graceful rhythm, she felt the eyes again, glances from nearby desks, half hidden behind laughter. She heard snippets. Know-it-all. Robot. Boring. She kept her gaze fixed on the page, pretending she didn't hear, pretending that the world was just her and the math. It was easier that way. Outside, the schoolyard shimmered in heat. The bell tower cast long shadows across the field. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang a single, steady note, clear, lonely, unwavering. Sarah's hand paused mid-equation. For a moment, she wished she could be that bird, small, unseen, free to sing without anyone laughing. She finished her worksheet before anyone else. Instead of turning it in right away, she doodled on the margins, spirals, triangles, the beginnings of equations that didn't exist yet. Each one felt like a secret language, hers alone. When Mrs. Johnson returned, she glanced at Sarah's paper and smiled softly, unaware of the weight sitting on the little girl's shoulders. As the day drew to a close, the sun lower behind the playground, its light stretching across the classroom floor, the laughter, the teasing, the whispering, all of it blurred into a background haze. Sarah sat still at her desk, hands folded, watching the dust motes float through golden light. They rose and fell like tiny worlds suspended between breaths. For a brief heartbeat, she smiled, not because of praise or victory, but because the numbers still made sense, even when people didn't. Then a voice from behind, soft, mocking, broke the spell. "Hey, genius, bet you don't even know how to play tag." The laughter that followed was light, but it sliced cleanly through a small moment of peace. Sarah's smile faltered, then faded completely. She turned back to her notebook, pressing her pencil against the paper until the tip snapped. And just like that, the quiet brilliance that had lit her eyes dimmed, tucked safely away behind silence. Evening had settled gently over the small town, washing the streets in silver light. The laughter of children outside faded into the hum of passing cars. Inside a modest apartment, a single bulb flickered above the kitchen table, where bills lay scattered like fallen leaves. Sarah's father, Daniel, sat hunched forward, elbows on the table, a calculator blinking in front of him. The screen glowed faintly against his tired eyes. Numbers that refused to add up, hours that refused to stretch far enough. On the other side of the room, Sarah sat cross-legged on the couch, clutching a notebook filled with equations and doodles. She watched him silently, her small face half hidden behind the pages. To her, he was a giant, the man who fixed broken toys and chased away nightmares. But lately, even giants seemed tired. The clock on the wall ticked like a reminder he didn't want. Every second, another promise slipping through his fingers. He rubbed his forehead, whispering, "Next month will be better next month." Sarah closed her notebook gently and slid off the couch. Her bare feet padded softly across the floor until she stood beside him. "Daddy," she said quietly, "did you know that if you divide happiness by time, the answer gets smaller if time runs out?" He looked up, blinking. "What?" She giggled shyly. "It's just some math thing." He smiled, the kind of smile that lives between exhaustion and love. "Then we'll just have to make more time, huh?" She nodded, serious. "Promise?" He hesitated. Then, placing his large, callous hand over hers. He said the words he said so many times before, the words he meant every single time. I promise. That night, after she went to bed, Daniel stayed at the table long after the house grew quiet. The rain outside turned into a gentle storm, tapping against the windows like fingers urging him to keep going. He picked up a photo frame beside the bills, a picture of him holding baby Sarah at the fair, both faces smeared with ice cream, laughter frozen in time. The frame was chipped, but the memory was whole. He remembered that day vividly, how she had pointed at the carousel and said, "Daddy, the horses never stop running." And he had promised her they would go back every year. They hadn't been back once. The thought stung like a splinter. He stood, walked to her room, and peeked in. Sarah was asleep, her small hand curled around a pencil, numbers scribbled faintly on her bedsheet. For +8 is equal to 12. 12 times 2 is equal to 24. Dreams written in math. He whispered, "I'm sorry, baby." Then he turned off the light. The next morning smelled of burnt toast and cheap coffee. Daniel buttoned his worn-out shirt, the one with the faint oil stains that never washed out. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, feet swinging, humming a tune as she ate cereal. "You working late again tonight?" she asked between bites. He paused. "Probably. Mr. Langley said there's a shipment coming in." She nodded slowly, pushing her bowl away. "Can we get ice cream tomorrow then?" He looked at her, big hopeful eyes that didn't understand deadlines or overtime. He wanted to say yes, but the truth felt heavier than he could carry. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "I promise." She smiled, that same smile from the picture frame, and ran to grab her backpack. As they walked to school, Sarah held his hand tightly, her small steps skipping to match his longer ones. The wind tugged at her hair, and the morning sun painted everything gold. At the school gate, she turned to him and said, "Daddy, if I win the math bowl, will you come watch me?" "Of course," he said without thinking. "Promise?" He bent down, brushed her hair from her eyes, and whispered, "I promise." The moment she disappeared through the gate, Daniel's smile faded. The truth was, he didn't know if he'd be able to keep that promise either. At the factory, machines roared and metal clanged in rhythm. Daniel's hands moved automatically, lifting, tightening, packaging. 12 hours of noise for 12 hours of pay, that was never enough. When the whistle finally blew, night had already swallowed the town. He stepped outside, wiping grease from his hands, staring at the stars barely visible through the haze. He thought of Sarah, probably asleep again before he could tuck her in. The weight of another broken promise pressed against his chest. 3 days later, Sarah came home clutching a flyer. Citywide Youth Math Competition. Open entry. Her eyes sparkled as she ran to him. "Daddy, Mrs. Johnson said I can enter. Even Amber's going." He took the paper, scanning the words. Registration fee, $20. Travel, not included. His heart sank, but he kept smiling. "That's amazing, sweetheart." She bounced on her toes. "You'll come, right?" He swallowed. "Of course." He tried to sound certain, but she saw the hesitation. Children always do. She tilted her head. "It's okay, Daddy. You don't have to if you're busy." He knelt down, eyes level with hers. "Sarah, listen to me. I will be there, no matter what it takes." And that night, he went through the bills again. He sold his old watch online, skipped dinner, and took a double shift. Every number he wrote down reminded him of her, and for once, the math made sense. The day of the competition arrived crisp and bright. Sarah wore her favorite blue dress, the one her father had ironed twice to hide the wrinkles. She carried her lucky pencil and a nervous smile. Daniel hadn't come home the night before. His bed was untouched. A note sat on the table. "Be brave, my little genius. I'll be there before it ends. Love, Dad." She read it 3 times, holding it to her chest like a secret prayer. At the auditorium, the crowd buzzed with excitement. Parents took photos. Teachers whispered proudly. Sarah sat in the second row beside Amber, who smirked. "You really think you can beat me again?" Amber teased. Sarah looked at her calmly. "I'm not trying to beat anyone." Amber rolled her eyes. "Sure you're not?" Soft orchestral swell builds beneath dialogue. When the host announced the start, the room fell silent. Equations flashed on screens. Questions grew harder each round. Sarah's pencil flew across her paper. Calm, steady, precise. Amber's jaw tightened with every correct answer Sarah gave. By the final question, only 2 contestants remained, Amber and Sarah. The audience held its breath. And somewhere in the back of the hall, the door creaked open. Daniel slipped inside, still in his work uniform, face streaked with sweat and dust. He stood quietly against the wall, afraid to move, afraid to miss even a second. On stage, Sarah looked up and saw him. Her heart lifted. He gave a small wave, mouthing, "I'm here." The final question appeared, a complex probability puzzle, the kind only adults could love. The host read it aloud, but Sarah barely heard the words. All she could see was her father, standing there, smiling despite everything. She took a deep breath. Numbers danced in her head like constellations, each one connecting to another until the answer glowed clear as daylight. She pressed the buzzer. The room went still. She explained her reasoning softly, confidently, her voice trembling at first, then strengthening as she spoke. When she finished, the host turned to the judges. They nodded. Correct. The crowd erupted in applause. Amber froze, disbelief washing over her. Daniel clapped the loudest, tears streaking down his face. Sarah's eyes found his again. This time, she smiled, the same pure, radiant smile from years ago, unbroken, unafraid. When the event ended, reporters surrounded Sarah, flashing cameras, asking how she felt. But she didn't answer them. She ran straight into her father's arms. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. He held her close. "I told you I would." And in that single embrace, every missed dinner, every late night, every broken promise mended itself into something whole again. That night, they sat at the same kitchen table where numbers once felt cruel. But now, those numbers told a different story. A prize check lay between them, enough to pay the bills, enough to breathe again. Daniel looked at her and said, "You didn't just win, Sarah. You taught me something." She tilted her head. "What's that?" He smiled. "That sometimes, when life doesn't add up, love can still make the equation right." She giggled. "That's not how math works, Daddy." He laughed too. "It is tonight." They stayed up late, drawing shapes and equations, turning the kitchen table into a galaxy of dreams. Before bed, Sarah looked up at him and whispered, "Daddy, you kept your promise." He brushed her hair gently. "Always." And so, between overtime shifts and sleepless nights, between chalkboards and broken pencils, a father's love met a daughter's brilliance. And together, they solved something greater than math. Because sometimes, promises aren't measured in hours or paychecks, but in moments like these, when love finally catches up with time. At 8 years old, Sarah Parker already understood something most adults never learn. That being different, even when it's a gift, can be a very lonely thing. When other children her age were learning times tables, Sarah was already solving equations meant for college students. To her, numbers weren't just math. They were comfort, patterns, predictable, safe. People always think being a genius means being celebrated. But in Sarah's world, it meant something else entirely, silence. She didn't mind silence. Not really. What hurt most was when people noticed her, just to remind her she didn't belong. Amber had always been the smart one, the girl with the perfect handwriting, the teacher's favorite answers, and a father who taught at the university. But when Sarah arrived, everything changed. Sarah never tried to steal anyone's spotlight. She didn't even understand why there had to be one. She just wanted to learn. But in a world obsessed with comparison, her brilliance made her the enemy of someone else's pride. Each compliment to Sarah was a quiet cut to Amber's ego. And every time Sarah answered a question correctly, the whispers grew louder. Show off. Teacher's pet. Robot. The words didn't sting at first, until they did. Lunch became her quiet hour. Not by choice, but by habit. She'd sit at the corner table, open her lunchbox, and take small bites between lines of numbers she scribbled on napkins. The cafeteria was loud. Laughter, trays clattering, the hum of friendship all around her. But Sarah existed in her own little orbit, one built not of noise, but of thoughts. Sometimes she'd imagine numbers as friends. 3s and 7s were her favorite. Bold, unique, unpredictable. She'd pair them in her head and wonder how they'd get along if they were people. It sounds strange, but to Sarah, numbers made more sense than people ever did. But even in her quiet world, loneliness has a sound. It's not the absence of noise, it's the echo of laughter that isn't yours. She would sometimes look up just for a moment when she thought someone might join her, but the moment always passed. No one ever came. And so she stayed the quiet genius, the girl too young to fit in, too smart to blend in, and too kind to fight back. Her walk home was always her favorite part of the day. The world was softer then, the noise behind her, the sky fading to gold. That was when she could finally breathe. She'd count the steps from school to home, 642 exactly. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and still know when she reached the gate. It wasn't just counting, it was control. Numbers never teased her. They never lied. Most days, her father worked late. She understood grown-ups have important things to do, but sometimes she wished he'd just be there when the sun was still up. So she filled her evenings with puzzles and paper. Math became her lullaby, her way of making sense of a world that didn't make sense back. Her father called her my little professor. She liked that. It made her feel seen, because at school she felt invisible. It's funny how the same gift that lifts one person up can isolate another. Sarah's intelligence wasn't something she bragged about. It was something she tried to hide. She learned that pretending to be normal made life easier. So she'd stumble on purpose, give wrong answers, laugh at jokes she didn't find funny. But inside, she wondered, if I have to pretend to belong, do I really belong at all? Some nights, she'd stare at the ceiling and imagine what friendship might feel like. Someone to talk to about more than homework. Someone who'd listen, not because she was smart, but because she was Sarah. But she never finished drawing the second figure, because she didn't know what that person looked like yet. One afternoon, her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, noticed. She saw how Sarah's eyes stayed down, how her laughter never came as easily as it used to. So she tried to help. She paired Sarah with Amber on a class project, hoping they might find common ground. But the world doesn't change that easily. When the project got an A, Amber took the credit. Sarah didn't argue. She never did. She just smiled and whispered, "Good job." That night, Mrs. Johnson stayed late at school. She looked at Sarah's notebook, the pages filled with equations and notes far beyond her grade level. And she realized something. Sarah wasn't just gifted, she was exceptional. But even exceptional children need something more than opportunity. They need understanding. Days turned into weeks. Sarah's grades soared, but her smile faded. She was praised for her mind, but forgotten for her heart. She missed laughing with someone, missed being 8, missed feeling ordinary. Sometimes, during recess, she walked to the edge of the playground and closed her eyes. She'd listen, not to the kids shouting or the whistle blowing, but to the faint hum of the world behind all the noise. That sound, quiet and constant, was the only thing that made her feel calm, because it reminded her that even when no one saw her, the world still turned, life still moved, and someday, maybe, someone would understand her. Sarah didn't know it yet, but this loneliness, this space between her and everyone else, was shaping her into something rare, the kind of person who listens deeper, feels stronger, and dreams bigger than most ever dare. Each number she wrote, each problem she solved wasn't just math. It was her way of speaking to the universe, a language no one else around her could yet understand. She was building her world quietly, one equation, one dream, one lonely lunch at a time. One evening, as she sat by her window, Sarah noticed something. Across the street, the lights in Amber's house were always bright. Voices, laughter, the kind of noise she thought happiness sounded like. But then one night, she saw Amber sitting by her own window, crying, just a silhouette wiping her face. And in that moment, Sarah understood something she never had before. Even people who seem to have everything might be fighting their own invisible battles. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Maybe I'm not the only one who feels alone." The next day, Sarah smiled at Amber in class. A small smile, hesitant, but real. Amber didn't smile back. Not yet. But Sarah didn't need her to. She had finally learned the most important equation of all, that kindness multiplies, even when no one sees it. And though she didn't know it, this small act, this tiny moment of courage, would ripple farther than she ever imagined. Sarah's story was only beginning. Her loneliness wasn't her end. It was her foundation. Every silent lunch, every whispered insult, every lonely walk home, they were building something inside her, something stronger than fear, something brighter than genius. She was learning that brilliance means nothing without compassion, that intelligence is power, but empathy is purpose. And somewhere deep down, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world would one day see her not as a lonely girl with numbers, but as a girl who turned loneliness into light. She didn't know it yet, but the stage was already being set for something extraordinary. It began on an ordinary Wednesday morning, the kind where pencils scratched lazily across lined paper and the faint scent of chalk dust floated in the air like tired snow. Mrs. Johnson's third-grade classroom hummed with that familiar mix of chatter and restlessness, the sound of children caught somewhere between curiosity and boredom. But at the back of the room, by the window streaked with sunlight, sat Sarah, quiet, focused, her notebook filled not with doodles or stories, but with equations, tiny worlds of numbers she seemed to live inside. That morning, her pencil danced across the page with a rhythm no one else could hear, a rhythm that belonged to her alone. And in the row beside her, Amber watched. Amber Waldorf, confident, polished, the undisputed genius of Maplewood Elementary. Her father's reputation as a world-renowned mathematician had wrapped her name in prestige before she could even spell it. To the class, she was untouchable, until Sarah came along. When Mrs. Johnson praised Sarah for solving a problem even the older students struggled with, Amber's smile tightened. Praise was her territory, and now a quiet 8-year-old with shy voice was trespassing. That afternoon, Amber made a suggestion. "Mrs. Johnson," she said sweetly, "why don't we do a math challenge? Like a competition, to make learning fun." The class erupted in cheers. Fun meant no reading, no history, just numbers and noise. Mrs. Johnson, charmed by Amber's enthusiasm, agreed. And so it began, the event that would later echo far beyond that little classroom. Desks were pushed aside, creating a small stage of open space. The whiteboard gleamed like a battlefield waiting for its first move. Markers lined up neatly on the tray, red, blue, black, green, colors that would soon spell triumph and humiliation. 2 contestants, Mrs. Johnson declared, Amber and Sarah. Laughter rippled through the room, half excitement, half disbelief. Sarah's eyes widened. Compete? Against Amber? The thought curled her stomach into knots. But then Mrs. Johnson smiled, her kind eyes shining. "It's just for fun, sweetheart. No pressure." Sarah nodded slowly, her fingers trembling as she rose from her seat. Amber, on the other hand, stood tall, adjusting the bow in her golden hair as though preparing for a ceremony. Round 1 began with simple arithmetic. 7 times 8? Mrs. Johnson asked. Amber's hand shot up like lightning. 56. Correct. A murmur of approval. Easy start. Sarah's heart beat faster. Round 2, fractions. Round 3, geometry. By round 4, the problems had grown teeth. And with every question, something strange happened. Sarah didn't hesitate. She didn't frown or scribble notes. She simply listened and answered. Each time, her soft voice floated through the air like a small miracle. -12. 0.75. 496. And each time, Amber's confidence wavered a little more. The class began to whisper. Whoa, she got it again. Even Amber missed that one. The air thickened. Pride clashed with awe. By the 10th round, the scoreboard told a story no one expected. Sarah, 10. Amber, 7. Amber's jaw tightened. The bow in her hair no longer felt like a crown. It felt like a target. She forced a laugh. "Lucky guesses," she said, but her voice cracked slightly on the second word. Mrs. Johnson, sensing the tension, raised the difficulty. "This one's special," she said. "Let's see who can solve it without paper." She wrote a problem that wrapped the board in complexity. Exponents, parentheses, variables, layers upon layers of logic. The kind of question that usually made even adults hesitate. Amber's hand hovered, then dropped. She bit her lip. Sarah's eyes scanned the board, tracing invisible pathways through the numbers. For her, math wasn't a riddle. It was music. Every digit hummed in harmony until, at last, they settled on a single note. She whispered, 216. The class gasped. Mrs. Johnson turned, checked the board, and smiled. "That's correct." Amber's smile vanished completely now. In her chest, something sharp twisted, pride, jealousy, maybe both. No one had ever outshone her before. Not in reading, not in science, not in math. And certainly not in front of the whole class. She forced herself to clap, each pat of her hands sounding more like defiance than applause. But Sarah didn't notice. She just looked down at her shoes, cheeks flush pink, unsure how to react to the sudden sea of eyes on her. Mrs. Johnson beamed. "That's our winner for today. Let's give both of them a round of applause." The class erupted, some genuinely impressed, others giggling nervously. Amber sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The edges of her perfect composure began to crumble. Across the room, her father's framed photo, pinned to the family achievements board, seemed to stare at her, a silent reminder of expectations she could never escape. When the bell rang, children poured out like marbles from a jar, laughter echoing down the hallway. Sarah packed her books carefully, still unsure whether she should feel proud or scared. Amber lingered by the doorway, watching. "Nice job," she said, her voice sweet but heavy with something colder beneath. "Thanks," Sarah murmured. Amber leaned closer. "But you know my dad's a real mathematician, right? He's not going to like this little mistake." Sarah blinked. "Mistake?" Amber smiled, thin, practiced. "Yeah, you made him look bad. He was supposed to speak at the school next week. Now everyone's going to talk about you instead." And with that, Amber walked away, her shoes clicking against the tile like punctuation marks at the end of a warning. Sarah stood frozen. For the first time that day, she wished she hadn't been right. That evening at the Waldorf residence, a storm brewed behind polished glass and quiet walls. Amber sat at the dinner table, pushing peas around her plate while her father, Dr. Waldorf, read emails between bites of salmon. "Lost again," he said casually, not looking up. Amber's throat tightened. "She got lucky." "Luck," he repeated, almost amused. "In mathematics?" His voice cut sharper than any knife. "She's just a kid," Amber said quickly. "She probably cheated, or—" Dr. Waldorf lowered his fork. The sound of metal against porcelain echoed through the dining room. "Amber," he said, leaning forward, "you are my daughter, my legacy. I will not have some child making a mockery of what we stand for." Amber nodded, tears threatening to spill. He sighed, pushing his plate aside. "We'll fix this. I'll handle it." Meanwhile, across town, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her father, Mr. Benson. Their home was smaller, humbler, but filled with warmth. The kind of warmth that didn't come from money, but from presence. "Math competition, huh?" he said, smiling tiredly as he flipped through her notebook. Sarah nodded, twisting her fingers. Amber didn't like it. Her dad's really smart. Maybe I shouldn't have one. Her father chuckled softly. "You don't win because someone else loses, sweetie. You win because you try." But she said I embarrassed them. He reached across the table and gently tapped her chin until she looked up. "Listen to me. You never embarrass people by being good at something. You just remind them that greatness doesn't belong to one family, one name, or one person." Sarah smiled faintly, comforted by his words. though somewhere deep inside, a small worry still lingered. And outside their window, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with the faint sound of distant thunder. The next morning, the principal made an announcement. Maplewood Elementary will host its first annual Math Bowl next week. Guest speaker, Dr. Edward Waldorf. The class erupted. Amber's eyes glowed with triumph. Sarah's heart dropped. Amber leaned across the aisle, whispering, "See? Told you. My dad's coming. And this time, he'll show everyone who the real genius is." Mrs. Johnson looked at Sarah with quiet concern, but said nothing. The competition wasn't just for fun anymore. It had become a test, a challenge that would pit a little girl's quiet brilliance against a man's unyielding pride. Over the next few days, the school buzzed with anticipation. Posters went up. Parents were invited. Even local newspapers caught wind of the story. Tiny Prodigy shocks classroom. Amber practiced under her father's supervision. Sarah studied alone, not to win, but to understand. While Amber rehearsed formulas to perfection, Sarah chased curiosity down endless rabbit holes of logic and wonder. Her desk became a map of numbers and scribbles, her heart a compass that pointed only toward discovery. On the morning of the Math Bowl, the gymnasium was transformed. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, parents whispering excitedly. A long table stood at the front, adorned with calculators, markers, and a banner that read, "Celebrating Young Minds." Dr. Waldorf arrived in a crisp gray suit, every step exuding confidence. Amber followed, head held high. When Sarah entered, wearing her favorite sky blue sweater, the crowd turned curious eyes toward her. Some smiled kindly, others whispered. That quiet girl from third grade, the one who'd beaten the genius. Mrs. Johnson squeezed her shoulder. "Remember what I told you. Have fun." Sarah nodded, though her small hands trembled. When the competition began, the questions came fast. Addition, subtraction, geometry, probability. Each round designed to challenge, to overwhelm. Amber answered swiftly, her father's approving nod driving her forward. Sarah took her time, listening, breathing, thinking. By mid-round, the scoreboard stood neck and neck. Amber, 15. Sarah, 15. The audience leaned forward. Then came the tiebreaker. A single question, written in looping marker across the board. If 5 machines take 5 minutes to make 5 toys, how long will 100 machines take to make 100 toys? Amber smirked. Easy. 100 minutes. Dr. Waldorf smiled approvingly. Sarah hesitated, then whispered, 5 minutes. A pause. Mrs. Johnson checked the answer key and looked up in astonishment. She's right. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amber's smile froze, then vanished completely. Dr. Waldorf's expression hardened, pride cracking just enough to reveal disbelief beneath. And from the back of the room, Mr. Benson rose to his feet, clapping once slowly, with tears shining in his eyes. The applause spread like wildfire. In that moment, Sarah didn't just solve a problem. She solved something far greater. She showed a room full of doubters that brilliance can come from anywhere, even from the quietest desk by the window. Amber stared at the floor, her face pale. The perfect smile she practiced so often had faded completely, leaving behind only silence. But somewhere deep within that silence, perhaps a seed of humility began to grow. And as the cheers swelled around her, Sarah looked toward her father, who mouthed the words she would remember for the rest of her life. "I'm proud of you." That was the day an 8-year-old girl reminded a world obsessed with titles and reputations that genius isn't measured by who shouts the loudest, but by who listens longest. The day a classroom game became a spark that lit up imaginations everywhere. The day Sarah Benson, the quiet kid with the sky blue sweater, stepped into history. And as the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, one thing remained certain. The story had only just begun. By the time Friday arrived, Maplewood Elementary had never seen so many cars in its parking lot. Parents, students, and even a few reporters gathered beneath the banner stretched across the entrance. An evening of numbers and minds, guest speaker, Dr. Edward Waldorf. To most, it was just a community lecture. But for 2 people, it was something else entirely. For Amber, it was redemption. For Sarah, it was an invitation into a storm she never asked for. Inside, the auditorium pulsed with a polite excitement, an audience that didn't yet know it was waiting for history. Rows of chairs shimmered under fluorescent light. The air smelled faintly of new paper and coffee. Sarah sat near the middle, legs swinging nervously, her small hand wrapped around her father's callous one. He'd traded his worn work boots for the only pair of polished shoes he owned, though the crease in his brow betrayed his worry. "Are you sure you want to be here, Pumpkin?" he whispered. Sarah nodded. "I just want to listen." Her father smiled faintly. "Then we'll listen." Across the aisle, Amber turned. That familiar smile already on her lips, the one painted carefully to hide sharp edges. She gave a small wave. Sarah returned it, hesitant, polite, and then the crowd erupted in applause as Dr. Waldorf took the stage. He looked every inch the scholar. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who filled a room not with noise, but with the certainty of his presence. His voice carried authority, the kind that made students sit straighter and adults stop checking their watches. "Mathematics," he began, "is the language of the universe. And like any language, it must be spoken with precision." Amber watched him from the front row, pride gleaming in her eyes. Sarah watched too, but for a different reason, fascination. She admired anyone who loved numbers the way she did. As Dr. Waldorf spoke, he paced slowly across the stage, marker in hand, symbols blooming on the whiteboard behind him like constellations. "Now," he said, "let's discuss probability, the logic of uncertainty." He drew 3 rectangles. "Imagine 3 doors. Behind one, a prize. Behind the others, nothing. You pick a door. Then, before you open it, the host reveals one of the empty doors and offers you a choice. Switch or stay. What should you do?" The Monty Hall problem. Simple in story, deceptive in truth. Dr. Waldorf scanned the audience. Who knows the answer? Amber's hand shot up before anyone else moved. "You should stay with your first choice," she declared, her voice steady. "It's 50-50 either way." Her father smiled. "That's my girl." A round of approving nods swept the hall. Even the adults murmured agreement. It felt logical. But in the middle rows, Sarah's brow furrowed. Something didn't add up. She had read about this before, once, in an old library book with torn pages. The odds weren't 50-50. The numbers told a different story, one that defied intuition but obeyed truth. Her heart began to thud. She didn't want to speak. Not here. Not now. But silence pressed heavier than fear. Before she knew it, her small hand rose into the air. Dozens of heads turned. The professor's eyes followed the motion until they landed on her. "Yes, young lady?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You should switch doors." The audience chuckled softly. Someone muttered, "Cute." Dr. Waldorf smiled, the way a teacher smiles at a mistaken child. "Oh, and why is that?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Because the probability isn't even. If you switch, you have a 2/3 chance to win." Laughter rippled louder this time, echoing off the auditorium walls. Even Amber giggled behind her hand. Dr. Waldorf tilted his head, amusement flickering across his face. "And what makes you think that, little one?" Sarah looked down. I worked out before." Her father squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing reassurance across her knuckles. There was a moment of silence, the kind that stretches until it becomes almost unbearable. Then Dr. Waldorf, in the smooth voice of a man too confident to feel threatened, said, "Well, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your reasoning?" The room murmured approval. A few phones lifted, ready to record. Sarah froze. Demonstrate? On stage? In front of everyone? Her father leaned closer. "You don't have to, sweetheart." But deep inside, something whispered louder than fear. "You can." So she stood. Her knees trembled, but her steps were steady as she climbed the stage. Dr. Waldorf handed her the marker, towering above her like a shadow carved from intellect and pride. "Go ahead," he said, smiling thinly. "Show us." Sarah faced the whiteboard. For a moment, the rows of faces blurred into nothing but colors and light. She took a breath. "Okay," She began quietly, drawing 3 boxes labeled Door 1, Door 2, Door 3. Let's say the prize is behind Door 1. She drew a small star inside. If you pick Door 1, she continued, and the host opens one of the empty doors, switching makes you lose. But if the prize is behind Door 2 or 3, and you pick Door 1 first, switching makes you win. Her hand moved faster now, confidence rising with each line. That means if you switch, you win in 2 out of 3 cases. She turned, marker tapping lightly against her fingers. So switching gives you a 2/3 chance. The audience fell silent. No laughter, no whispers, just quiet. Dr. Waldorf's smile faded, almost imperceptibly, but it faded nonetheless. He took the marker back, studied the board, and for a heartbeat, the great mathematician had no words. The silence broke like dawn. Applause spread through the hall, soft at first, then thunderous, a wave of astonishment crashing over disbelief. Amber's eyes widened. The certainty she had worn like armor cracked open. Dr. Waldorf cleared his throat. Well, that is indeed the correct interpretation. But his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Sarah smiled, not proudly, but shyly, as if the world had just handed her something too big to hold. She handed the marker back. "Thank you, sir." She turned toward the stairs, scanning the crowd for her father. He was already standing, hands clasped, tears brimming, pride radiant as sunlight. As Sarah returned to her seat, people leaned toward her, whispering words she never thought she'd hear. Brilliant. Incredible. Who is she? For the first time, she wasn't the outcast genius. She was a girl who had silenced a room full of adults with nothing but truth. Amber stared straight ahead, her hands clasped tightly together. Somewhere inside, envy tangled with awe. Dr. Waldorf finished his lecture, but his rhythm was gone. Every few minutes, his eyes flickered toward the middle row, toward the little girl who had dared to question him. After the applause faded and people began to leave, Sarah and her father waited by the doorway, letting the crowd pass. He knelt beside her. "You were incredible, Sarah." She blushed. "I didn't mean to make him upset." Her father smiled. "You didn't upset him. You reminded him that even the smartest people can still learn." Just then, a shadow fell across them. Dr. Waldorf stood there, expression unreadable. Amber trailed behind, eyes lowered. The professor looked at Sarah for a long moment, then extended his hand. "You explained it perfectly," he said quietly. "I suppose even I forget the beauty of simple reasoning." Sarah shook his hand timidly. "Thank you, sir." Then Amber whispered, "You were really good." Sarah smiled. "Thanks." For the first time, there was no rivalry, just respect. By the time Sarah and her father stepped outside, the night had softened into a drizzle. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered stars. They walked in silence for a while, the cool air wrapping around them like peace itself. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Dad." "Yeah." "Do you think he still doesn't like me?" He chuckled. "Honey, if every grown-up liked being proven wrong, the world would be a lot wiser." She giggled. The sound echoed into the night, bright, free. That evening, while most of the town slept, a parent in the audience uploaded the video to social media. The clip lasted less than 2 minutes. Just a little girl explaining the Monty Hall problem, her voice calm, her reasoning flawless. By morning, it had 500,000 views. By noon, 2 million. People everywhere were talking about the math prodigy who humbled a professor. Comment sections overflowed with words like inspiring, brilliant, and unbelievable. And in every frame, Sarah's face glowed not with arrogance, but with quiet wonder, the expression of someone simply happy to share what she loved. At school the next day, the atmosphere had changed. Students crowded around her locker, asking questions, offering smiles. Even the teachers looked at her differently, not as the odd little girl, but as something rare and extraordinary. Amber approached between classes, holding 2 notebooks. "I, thought you might like these. My dad said they're college level. You probably finish them in a week." Sarah blinked. "Thanks." Amber hesitated, then added, "Guess I still have a lot to learn." Sarah's smile was soft. We both do. They laughed. The real kind, not the practice kind that used to echo in classrooms. That afternoon, when Sarah returned home, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by letters and printed emails. He looked up, grinning wide. You might want to see this. On the screen was a message from a research company, an invitation for Sarah to join their youth advisory board as a junior consultant. Her jaw dropped. Did they want me? He nodded. $10,000 a month. Sarah's eyes widened. That's more than you make in a year. He laughed, wiping a tear. Looks like I've been promoted to your assistant. But beneath his laughter was something else. Relief. The years of double shifts, late nights, missed ice cream promises, maybe they hadn't been for nothing. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a prodigy, but the reason he kept going when life tried to wear him down. And in that small kitchen, between laughter and disbelief, a new chapter quietly began. That night, Sarah lay in bed, replaying the moment on stage. The lights, the silence, the applause. She realized that bravery wasn't about being unafraid. It was about standing up even when your voice trembles. Somewhere out there, people were watching her video, learning, smiling. And maybe, just maybe, another little girl who loved numbers would see it and believe she could belong too. Sarah closed her eyes. Love plus courage equals true genius, she whispered, drifting into sleep. And so, an 8-year-old's whisper became an echo heard around the world. A reminder that brilliance has no uniform, no pedigree, no age, only heart. Morning had always been a race for her father, a rush of uniforms, alarms, and deadlines. But that day felt different. The air itself seemed slower, gentler, like time was giving him a choice. He stares at his old work boots by the door, scuffed, tired, faithful companions through too many double shifts. For years, those boots had carried him from factory floors to night buses, from overtime shifts to empty promises. Every step had been for her, for Sarah, the little girl who waited by the window every evening, believing her father would walk through the door before the streetlights blinked on. Coffee steams. A digital clock blinks 6:32 a.m. He sits at the table, hands around the mug, staring into nothing. He had done everything the world told him a good father should: work hard, provide, endure. But lately, he'd begun to wonder, what if providing wasn't the same as being there? Each missed moment had carved a quiet scar inside him, a scar that no paycheck could heal. Phone vibrates. The same old ringtone. The same boss's name glowing on screen. Normally, he would answer before the second ring. But today, he let it buzz. Because for the first time, he realized he didn't owe the world his exhaustion. He silences the call, exhales slowly, and looks toward the small bedroom where Sarah still sleeps beneath a blanket patterned with stars. She had spent years dreaming of galaxies and numbers. He had spent years surviving. Maybe it was time for both their dreams to finally meet. He cracks eggs into a pan, a sound Sarah hasn't heard on a weekday since forever. When Sarah wandered into the kitchen, her hair messy and eyes half closed, she stopped at the smell. Her father never cooked breakfast on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were for rushing, for burnt toast and goodbyes. But that morning, the table was set, the juice poured, the clock forgotten. "You're cooking," she giggled. He smiled. "Figured I'd remind the stove what I look like." They ate slowly, between laughter and tiny silences that didn't feel awkward anymore. Outside, the bus rumbled past, the same one he used to chase every morning. He didn't even look up. He stands by the door, uniform folded neatly in his hands. He traces the company logo with his thumb, a ghost of habit. Leaving wasn't easy. People think quitting is weakness, but sometimes it's the bravest sentence you'll ever speak. He places the folded uniform on the table, next to Sarah's viral video printout, her little face frozen mid-smile. He'd spent years fighting for stability, and now he was about to trade it for something invisible. Hope, he whispers softly, almost to himself. Today we start over. When he arrived at work, everyone thought he'd come for another shift. But Daniel's face carried a calm they'd never seen, the calm of a man who'd already made peace with his choice. He hands over his ID card. The foreman frowns. You sure about this, Dan? Times are rough. Yeah, he says, voice steady. That's exactly why I'm sure. He didn't give a speech. He didn't look back. He just walked away, leaving behind years of noise for the sound of his daughter's laughter. Door creaks open. Sarah sits at the table solving a logic puzzle. You're home early, she says, surprised. He nods. Earlier than ever. She didn't understand at first. To her, adults didn't just stop working. But when he knelt down and said, "From now on, my job is being your dad," her eyes glistened with a joy too big for words. She hugs him tight. The world outside hums softer. In that embrace, every missed bedtime, every late apology, every maybe tomorrow dissolved. Because in that moment, tomorrow had finally arrived. Days turned into a rhythm of discovery. Mornings weren't for alarms anymore. They were for questions, chalk dust, and laughter. He listens as she explains a probability problem far beyond his grasp. He laughs, shaking his head. You lost me after the first fraction. That's okay, she smiles. I'll teach you again. And she did, patiently, joyfully, because genius isn't just knowing the answer, it's wanting to share it. Little by little, their small apartment transformed into a classroom of love. Proof that education can happen anywhere the heart is open. The world hadn't forgotten Sarah. Every letter carried a different handwriting, but the same message, hope. You inspire my daughter to love math again. Watching you made me want to finish school. For every word she read, her father read too. Not out of pride, but disbelief that his little girl had touched so many hearts. He keeps the letters in a box labeled for rainy days. Because someday when life felt heavy again, he wanted to remind her just how bright she could make the world. It's strange, isn't it? How life always gives us one more sunrise, one more chance to try again, to say the words we couldn't before, to love a little better than we did yesterday. Every ending carries the heartbeat of a new beginning. The trick is to listen, to find it in the laughter of a child, in the warmth of shared breakfast, in the way light falls on faces that once forgot how to smile. Because in the end, what saves us isn't perfection. It's presence, the choice to keep showing up even when it hurts, the courage to believe that tomorrow can still hold joy. And so, the story ends, not with goodbye, but with beginning. A father, a daughter,